A lot of what I say or will say, comes from a point of privilege. Having come from India, Indonesia, where, they say you typically succeed despite the government, unfortunately. Singapore government's right on the other side of the continuum. Extremely progressive. I was terrible in those early 2 years. I realized it was a classic failure for me. I was going through a bit of a personal crisis in terms of relationships. When you're also at that sort of a rock bottom, you're like, how bad can things be? It was great because we were selling by day, we had to deliver by night. We were not trained in the marketing communications world.
You brought that fresh perspective. You introduced elements of performance marketing early on before anyone was talking about analytics.
The agency world, what you see is pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch. In the IT services, they think long term. They think 3-year contracts, 5-year contracts. In marketing, we think campaign. Very short term, myopic thinking. It's a very inefficient business model, to be honest.
People who know nothing about startups also know that this is the textbook and this is the process.
You put it brilliantly. I didn't think of it that way, but now that you put it that way, I agree. So we did a massive Bollywood cricket virtual event through which we raised about collectively with Mr. Khosla's check about $3.4 million.
Adam Newman.
Disgraceful. For me, business is personal. Personal life is business. You need to have a broader perspective on life. It just can't be about the business you're operating.
Today I have with me Prantik Mazumdar. He is most well known for being the co-founder of Happy Marketer, which was sold to Dentsu, one of the largest advertising conglomerates. Right now, he is also a venture capital investor. He invests in startups across all stages. He's an investor in Elon Musk's SpaceX, BYJU, the edtech company based out of India, in Stripe, as well as EatJust. He's also personally an angel investor in companies like Chope and WhyQ for those in Singapore. He is recognized as one of the 50 most influential market leaders by World Marketing Congress. And today I want to talk about his journey all the way from his childhood to growing up to studying in NUS to his stint with the government, i.e. Singapore, known as at that time, and then with a brand consultancy, a digital marketing firm, then going on to start Happy Marketer along with Rachit Dayal, and to now running Dentsu's CXM division as their marketing director, and also all the investments as well as charitable work that he's involved in. He's based in Singapore with his wife, Dipti, and his 5-year-old son, Ayan. Prantik, thank you for being here. Been following you for 2 to 3 years now, and finally great to do this with you.
Thank you so much, Prahlad, for doing this, and for having me on your show. Indeed, a pleasure.
Okay, let's start all the way back. Tell us about your childhood. You grew up in multiple countries. What was that like? What were you like as a student? Any interests or aspirations or particular inclinations growing up?
Yeah, so, I grew up across 2 countries, India and Indonesia. And I think a common theme was, even in India, the common theme really was about sort of being an immigrant wherever I sort of grew up. So I'm originally from, West Bengal, but I grew up in Pune. And then thereafter, obviously, one emigrated from India to Indonesia. So I think one common element was you were sort of being a resident or an active citizen in another country, which is not necessarily your native place, which I thought was very interesting because it sort of forced you to sort of adapt to a new place, a new city, a new culture. You sort of got to meet people from different backgrounds, which I genuinely, that sort of sparked an interest in languages, in different cultures, and in just sort of trying to make friends in different scenarios. So I think that, was a common theme across Pune, Jakarta, and eventually Singapore. So obviously across the 3 cities that I've lived, Singapore is by far the longest. It's been 21 years, and so India, Pune was 13, Jakarta was about 5-6 years, and then Singapore is 21. So I think that's been a common theme, new settings, adapting, the whole immigration element, which also sort of makes you aware and sensitive to what's happening around the world today. Many countries, many progressive countries, developed countries are sort of becoming a bit more nationalistic, closing doors, tightening recruitment policies. But this, I genuinely believe that we're all immigrants, whether you are in America or in Singapore or in India. We've all sort of over the generations come from different places, and I think hence it's an interesting debate, but it's a tough one. I sort of feel it's very important to sort of firstly acknowledge that we're all immigrants. B, I think societies need to be way more open than we are today. It's a hard problem. I do recognize that, but I think it's an important one to acknowledge. Well, as a student, I think I did fairly well in school. Till school, I think generally would have uh, topped, would have come first to third in terms of rank. Was fairly active in extracurricular activities, primarily in sports, drama, debates. Uh, Ended up being the head boy of my school in Jakarta. So I think I would be in the good books of most teachers. But I think in university, that wasn't necessarily to be true. I don't think I lived up to my academic potential. I would say I would probably average or even in few years below average from an academic perspective. But I think in NUS, the good thing was two things. One was allowed to sort of pursue academically, you could pursue certain degrees or courses outside your major, which I thought was a wonderful thing to do. And I think that's how I got introduced to the whole idea of entrepreneurship, because NUS has this program called technopreneurship, or if you sort of did well in that, you could be selected in the NUS Overseas College program. And today, if you look at some of the most successful startups in Singapore, at least one of the co-founders is from that program, including Rachit, who is the original founder of Happy Marketer. He went on to the NUS Overseas College to Wharton, and he interned in a startup there, and that's where the seeds of Happy Marketer were essentially sown. So for me, I think that having that exposure across different genres, different modules was, mighty useful. Also, just the ability to sort of interact with people from different cultures, from a lot of friends from China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the ability to sort of connect through other activities. I think in university, whilst academics did not get enough attention, cricket definitely did. I got a very good chance to play for the university, traveled to Australia to play as well. Also, I did a lot of work in the halls that we lived in. Well, many of us had to do it because you got points, and if you didn't have enough points, you couldn't get a room in the hall of your choice, which was crucial for foreign students such as us. So I was the resident assistant for Prince George's Park, where I lived, participated in a lot of, cultural initiatives. So again, I think, in NUS, the exposure, I think, was fabulous. And I think one thing that NUS genuinely taught me was the elements of networking, elements sort of connecting with people from different walks of life, and also adapting to failure. Because, unlike my school days where I genuinely, used to sort of do well and top, here that didn't happen. And I think this is that too in a competitive environment like Singapore 20 years ago, that was tough. But I genuinely feel in hindsight, it's obviously easier in hindsight, but in hindsight, adapting to the social elements of failure, I think it just made you way more resilient. It just made you way more open that, what, such things happen. The only choice is to sort of learn and move on. So yeah, I must say overall, I think very blessed, privileged. A lot of what I say or will say, comes from a point of privilege, because I genuinely believe that I had a very good childhood. I had access to a lot of things that probably many of us take for granted: education, good health, a good family environment, travel opportunities to live in different places, and you also sort of start accepting and realizing that a lot of how life has panned out is perhaps because the dice was rolled in the right direction when you were born, or the environment you grew up in. So very thankful for that.
What would you say the role of your parents were along the journey? Were you, always motivated on your own to excel academically, or was it, was there an element of pressure in a positive way from the family?
I would say what was very good is, my dad and mom they come from West Bengal, but different walks of life. My dad's a mechanical engineer, went to IIT, he worked for Tata Motors for the longest time in India, and then he moved to Indonesia to work for Texmaco. So he was a mechanical engineer, always interested in science, tech, engineering. My mom has a very strong cultural background, so she's a dancer, she's a teacher. She organizes a lot of plays, a lot of cultural activities. So I think there were those two sort of forces, and I think what was very good is yes, there was always, I wouldn't say pressure, but there was always a sort of a conscious push to ensure that I was diligent and I, did my home, your classic things of I did my bit, I did my homework, I went to class, I showed up. But I think the biggest element was there was an environment which sort of, uh, encouraged one to be curious in terms of reading, in terms of meeting and talking to people, in terms of understanding different, the whole cultural element. Whilst to be honest, I am not that culturally inclined. But I think what they ensured is that they sort of gave me that exposure. They sort of put me to a tabla class. They sort of got me to dance and do elocution. And I was terrible at it initially, but over time, that exposure sort of made you at least understand what you like, don't like, what you're good, what you're not good at. But I thought what was good is they created that environment of curiosity and learning, and they sort of, as parents, did their bit to make me curious and got me the exposure, and then I could eventually, make a call as to am I good at something, am I not, do I like something, and I think that was very very crucial because when you started, when there's no undue pressure, but there is a sort of focus on following a process encouraging you to sort of learn beyond what's being taught in the classroom. I think my grandparents, my parents, whether it was through the encyclopedias back in the day, you got the whole series, or whether they would take me to plays, or whether they would take me to concerts or public speeches, or whether they would, they realized very soon that I was very interested in cricket. So a lot of the learnings was through cricket. Like I would remember that, learning concepts such as averages or additions, etc. You could learn through sport, right? So I thought, that element of giving that enough freedom, balancing it with exposing me to things which I didn't end up liking. In many cases, I would revolt that, I don't want to learn tabla. I want to use that time to play cricket. They were fine with it. But I think they did their bit to sort of push me to get that exposure and then say no if it didn't work out. So it was a fairly, I would say, fairly mature relationship because it's also important for the child to sort of make their own decisions after a while. Not no sort of force, sort of really sustainable or it. I don't. I think there's probably more detriment than benefit if there's too much of force. But I think it's important to sort of give them the exposure and then let them figure out what suits and what works out.
And how as kids we go around sharing with our friends what we want to be, what we aspire to be growing up. So what was there a certain something you wanted to be? Was that in the realm of science and technology, or something totally unconnected growing up? And as well as in US, while you were doing the technopreneurship program, was that when you decided that you are going to pursue entrepreneurship someday, or it wasn't clear at that point?
Yeah, so I think if you had asked me, my school days, the genuine answer was I wanted to pursue cricket as a sport, and till some point in time, when I thought that I could make it. So yeah, that was genuinely the desire to play for India, hopefully someday. But I guess two things happened. One is, of course, the family moved to Indonesia, so obviously, one never got a chance to sort of play cricket, in the local cricket circuit, so to speak. And also, you realize, I think whilst I love it, I don't think caliber-wise I was anywhere close to, or even commitment-wise. Now that I've seen or had the good fortune of playing with or meeting some people who've made it even to the IPL or to the state level, one realizes that it's a very, very different path, and the kind of commitment and effort required is definitely something I didn't do, or definitely didn't get close to it. In university, no, I think I got the exposure, but I don't think so. It would be fair to say that I, decided that I wanted to be. At least I sort of got an understanding that, oh, okay, this is a path. Because, growing up, I think I had this wrong notion that one sort of became an entrepreneur, or at least what back in India one called a businessman, only if you come from a business family. So at least that notion got changed that no, you can. It makes sense. Obviously you can start a business, but that was never registered in my head. But at least one figured that, oh wow, okay, in Singapore, plus in NUS, we saw some seniors who had done it. There were a couple of seniors, Karthik, Brojo, who had started Purple Ace. They sold the company. So like, okay, wow, this is possible. A few years senior to us, they've been doing this. So it was sort of good to just sort of know that it's possible. But I don't think I was sure or ready. In fact, I took the safer chance. Because I didn't do well academically, by year 4, I was very sure. The two good things I did, though, was I did part-time internships at Accenture for 2-3 years. made some decent money, got some good practical exposure, because I realized academics wasn't going to cut it for me. Also, very early, I realized, unlike in India, where I originally came from, here universities didn't have a placement obligation or a system. It was more like, we'll connect you with the corporates, but you got to figure out. So I realized I had to work very hard. So every weekend in my last semester, went on cutting Straits Times classifieds and just playing the volume game of applying. I remember I applied to 160 odd companies, probably had about 15, 20 interviews, had about 7 offers, but eventually took the safer path of joining the government, joining IE Singapore. So that was my sort of, I said I'll, either a government, or at some point I had thought I'll probably join an Accenture or an Infosys or HCL IT services, which was in vogue back then. In the mid 2000s, even before, the whole accidental entrepreneurship happened, there was a genuine desire at some point to sort of do public policy and, go down the path of diplomacy, maybe United Nations, or someone like a Shashi Tharoor was someone I still do look up to. And I did look up to him even back then. And I said, you know what, maybe one day I'll take a break and do either an MBA or a degree in public policy from Kennedy School or from LKY School of Public Policy. And maybe I'll go down that path, World Economic Forum, World Bank, United Nations. But no, I think life had other plans, and I think a lot of the credit towards entrepreneurship goes to Rachit. We were friends right from day one in Singapore, and by 2005, he was very sure after the NUS School of NUS Overseas College that he isn't going to work for anyone else. So very few people know this, that before Happy Marketer actually started, for 5 years, he struggled very hard. So for all the good positive stories today, for 5 years, he just lived on nearly no salary or very little salary. He did all kinds of things. He wrote ebooks on irritable bowel syndrome that he sold online for $50. He did hypnotherapy. He did logos and websites, basically whatever sort of that helped him survive. And then obviously Happy Marketer came into being, and he sort of got me interested, and he pulled me in. So very fortunate sort of where that friendship turned into business partnership, and that's what things have worked out great. But to your point, I don't think it was any point in my childhood or adolescence or early working career that I think that it was going to happen this soon. In my head, I had that classic mindset that, let me do a few years of work ex, I'll do an MBA, let me get some work ex under my belt, and maybe when I'm in my 40s, I'll give this a shot. But I suppose life had different plans.
So I just want to touch upon what you said in terms of your varied experiences from the internship at consulting company Accenture to IE Singapore, as it was called back then, a government body, and then your experiences with strategy consulting and the digital marketing firm. So I just want to understand what that transition was like from being an employee to co-founding the company, and how have your priorities and learnings shifted along the way as you made that transition?
That's a good one. So, when I joined the Singapore government, I think firstly was amazed at a few things, that how the government machinery takes young students, fresh grads, and, sort of push them onto the deep side and make them do some serious stuff. So I think out of my 3.5 years there, the breadth of the exposure was phenomenal. So within a few months of onboarding, I had to lead a few industry missions or their business delegations of CEOs to Korea, Japan, Vietnam, US, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, and it was fabulous because you're just I didn't have to do NS. I was just about 22, and at 22 you're sort of leading an industry delegation of people who are probably in their mid 40s, 50s. So that in itself gives you a lot of confidence. So of course you're sort of doing a lot of logistical work, you're doing industry research and planning, but when you start sort of hanging out, it's that whole networking element, the breadth of course, you're using your government card. So of course, people want to meet you because you're a government officer, and they're obviously meeting you because you're a government officer. You can open doors for them, give some sort of consider them for government grants. But that in return sort of gives you the exposure to just learn and see how are they doing business. What are the challenges? What are some of the ways that they're overcoming difficulties. Also, so there were 3 parts to my job. One is to sort of meet these people understand their internationalization needs in terms of capital, capability, and connections required. And these were, either startups or large companies like large telecom companies like Singtel, ST Telemedia, Pacific Internet, etc. And some of the bigger ones needed a lot of government lobbying, which was phenomenal. So, I also learned how G2G lobbying works. If someone, a telecom operator is going to acquire another operator somewhere else, what does that process sort of entail? Also, I was fortunate to be part of a couple of trade negotiations. One is between Singapore, Vietnam, and also, interestingly, between Singapore and India. And as an Indian, I'm an Indian citizen and a permanent resident. It sort of, it kind of gives you an exposure to how does trade negotiation happen. What are you sort of giving, taking? So I think that exposure was phenomenal because some of our trade missions also involved ministers from Singapore interacting with ministers, chief ministers, industry ministers, on the other side as well. So I think the first 3.5 years gave you a very good perspective of how proactive a government can be. And having come from India, Indonesia, where, they say you typically succeed despite the government, unfortunately. Singapore government's right on the other side of the continuum, extremely progressive, doing all kinds of scenario planning, supporting local enterprise in Singapore, as well as, in the overseas ecosystem. Absolute brilliant learning in terms of, it's a great sort of platform to leapfrog in your career in terms of a network, in terms of understanding the bigger picture of how an economy operates. And this is something I tell younger folks that, sometimes you tend to zoom in too much into your day-to-day job, which is fine. The details matter, but you also need to zoom out and understand what are you exactly doing? What's the larger picture? What's your involvement and contribution in the larger picture? So, just like in the consulting firms, you're made to understand the industry value chain. That, okay, if I'm doing digital marketing, it's going to help company A sell more insurance. And when you sell more insurance, you know what? Businesses and individuals are secure. And when businesses are secure, they can do XYZ. So you sort of start unraveling the whole economy and the ecosystem. And I think that's very important because as much as it's important to get depth, it's important to get that horizontal breadth as well. Your sort of language when you speak to other business folks changes. So you get great breadth and exposure. So that was phenomenal. The network was brilliant. And it just gives you a lot of confidence because you are not just marketing or representing an industry, but you're representing a country, right? So I've had the great fortune of sort of, with you in the US or in some very large forums in India to talk about the Singapore story, the Singapore growth story, or the Singapore investment story. Like one of my favorite ones was, I think this was in Hyderabad, where I was invited to talk about how Singapore became water independent. And I remember, it was received very well. So it sort of gives you a very, great amount of confidence that you're out there talking about already a great product, which is the Singapore Miracle story. And you're sort of educating and using that as a platform to connect with people and exchange ideas. So that was, when I left in 2008, that was sort of, what I got out of that experience. But what I also realized is, what I wanted to test out that, okay, this is great, but are people talking to me because of me or what I bring to the table, or is it because I have a government card? And it was important for me to test that out. So I said, I'm going to, move to the private sector. And I joined a brand consulting firm, a B2B brand consulting firm called Strategy.com, where they said, what, we need someone who's going to take our offerings and go to India and, set shop for us. And that was a great one for me because A, it was private sector, B, it was a country manager role. It involved sales. So I would get to learn and also test out my skills. And 2 years into that role, I realized it was a classic failure for me. I very quickly realized that people were talking to me because of my name card, not because of who I am or my capability. I also realized that I was terrible in those early 2 years in terms of sales. Whilst I was good at speaking, whilst I was good at I learned the art of networking and meeting people, connecting with them, but I was still struggling to sell. And I also learned a few things about how and why it's difficult to do cross-border business. Just because the Strategy.com was a very strong business in Singapore, but I failed to sort of take their success into India for various reasons: the product, the offering, the pricing, my own style. But that was a very good 2 years of just sort of, you know, being a reality check of, what I'm not good at or what's not working for me. And to acknowledge that, what, okay, this is not for me. I've not been able to do justice. And I wanted to come back to Singapore. And that's when digital was sort of just, this is 2008, 2009. Digital was beginning to sort of make its, make its presence felt. The Googles and Facebook were setting up shop here. And so I got a chance to work for an Indian digital marketing company called Pinstorm, headquartered out of Bombay, but in Singapore as head of APAC sales. And that was fascinating. Mahesh Murthy, that's right. And, a small 5-member office here in International Plaza, Tanjung Pagar. Very fortunate to work under someone like Geeta Sethi. We had 4-5 other colleagues. And because it was a small setup, digital was early. It was great because we were selling by day. We had to deliver by night because, again, very small team. Of course, we had a delivery center in Mumbai, but still you had to do a lot of hands-on work, which was great because, I was around 26 to 28 and I had time at my hand. I was fairly committed to what I was doing. I was keen to learn. So I think one thing that that phase that I really enjoyed, I also learned when I was back in Singapore, that Singapore is a place where there is tremendous opportunity to learn, to connect, to network. And it's really the bottleneck is you and your time and, how much do you want to sort of invest in yourself. So I made sort of commitments that, every week I'm going to go attend 1 or 2 events. One maybe self-funded, one maybe from the company. I would go and network with, I would go and meet at least 4 or 5 new people in the industry, right? And it is amazing. This is just around when when the Lehman crisis was going to happen, or when it had happened. But the opportunity was immense. So that was fabulous. So when Pinstorm happened, I learned the art and science of digital marketing. Once I got that better, I was in a far better position to sell and also manage clients. Right from working on NTUC FairPrice, NTU, ICICI, Taylor's College, quite a few of them, and it gave me a lot of joy because so the government, it was public sector. I was providing government services. Private in Strategicom, I was selling consultation services, and I wasn't very good at that. Also, I think what didn't sit very well with me, at least back then, is what am I selling when I'm consulting? Advice, my time. Which is great, but somehow, somewhere deep down within me, it didn't sit very well with me that, okay, what I'm really selling, because, I'll share a small anecdote. When I was in one of these pitch meetings in Pune at the final stage at a manufacturing company, there was a Sardarji founder. And, so we pitched in at, let's say, X. The next one in competition was X by 2. And he kept asking me this in English and then Hindi, eventually saying, like, son, what are you selling me? I use a lot of jargon. I said, oh, brand strategy, positioning, differentiation. He kept asking, like, beta, son, what are you selling me? I kept using jargon. And at the end, when he asked me 5, 6 times, he just smiled and said, look, at the end of the day, you're going to give me some bunch of PowerPoints and Word documents, right? And that hit me hard. Again, nothing wrong with it. Advice is important. It's powerful. But somewhere deep within, I felt, this is not tangible enough for what I'm charging. In digital marketing, I think what it allowed me is it allowed me to sort of just go down to the other spectrum, that apart from advice, I could implement things. I could build a website. I could drive traffic. I could generate leads. I could generate sales, right? And I knew if my advice was tangible and practical, was it working or not? So Pinstorm sort of gave me that pragmatism. Pinstorm gave me a lot of freedom, learned a lot from Mahesh, great pitch master, loved just the style and confidence of pitching. And that's, and I was looking to leave Pinstorm for a few reasons. And then Rachit knew about it. Obviously, we were very, very close friends, right? Socially. So he had started Happy Marketer in 2009, June, with another friend, Dave Liam. And he said, look, buddy, you're looking to leave. I know you have some interviews at Facebook and LinkedIn, but why don't you give this a shot? So in the month of May 2011 is when I first sort of broached the idea. We had a chat, and he sort of was persistent, saying, give it a shot. And I'm glad I did. I was going through a bit of a personal crisis in terms of relationships and stuff as well. So, when you're also at that sort of a rock bottom, you're like, how bad can things be? Let's give this a shot. So I told myself, maybe I'll give myself 2 or 3 years to fail. Of course, because I had to take a pay cut because Happy Marketer was too young to sort of pay or match my salary. But we came to an equity conclusion that, we'll have some equity. I'll have some basic decent salary. And that's when I jumped the ship. And it was a completely different world. And I think the one or two words that define it is really the buck stops with you. As much as you have the freedom and flexibility, accountability and responsibility for your own, as well as more importantly, others' payroll, I think that's where the buck drops. Is you are now suddenly responsible to sort of figure out salary for not just your household, but maybe eventually it became 55 people and their respective households. Uh, and I think I realized that I sort of thrive in that sort of pressure situation. I sort of want to be in that chaos. By definition, I'm not very structured or process oriented. Rachit is, and I'm not saying only one style works. We complement each other quite well in that sense. But for me, I think the joy, I keep telling this to Rachit, is what I was very thankful for the opportunity was just the sheer freedom. Freedom to think, to do what you want, to not be bound by time, to work 20 hours a day, to work 0 hours a day, to go and meet as many people as I want, to attend as many events, to sometimes just be on Twitter and keep tweeting away. And that is priceless. Freedom, I think we don't put enough price on this. The freedom to explore, to do things, to learn, priceless. Obviously, we had no idea where the business would go, but we just knew that we had the enthusiasm, the know-how. We just knew that we'll figure out a way. And I suppose it was easier then because you were single, you were young, demands of life wasn't much. You lived on, 2 to 2.5K a month. So just the risk appetite or the ability to experiment was a lot. So yeah, from the government safe spectrum to entrepreneurship and a couple of SMEs in between, I think it was a experience across the entire continuum, to be honest. Across different domains. It gave me a chance to learn different things. Also, most importantly, learn about myself, what I'm good at, what I want to learn, what I'm not good at. It's a fun discovery process to figure out your life, your journey. So very very sort of fortunate to have that opportunity to take those bets, or sometimes for those bets to find me.
Great point on accountability and freedom. I think many a times a lot of people in the corporate world, especially, are tend to be order takers. They need to be told what to do, and then they do a great job. But when it's completely on your own, to have that initiative and drive to, like you said, work either 0 or 20 hours a day, and the fact that the buck stops in you is a great learning, as well as the freedom that comes with it. I think that doesn't get talked about enough in terms of entrepreneurship in general. People see the fame and success and the accolades, and not enough credit goes to just the level of freedom you experience in terms of how you should spend your day, on a daily basis. So great point there. I just want to understand, at what stage was Happy Marketer when you joined Rachit and Dave? Had they already figured out a model in terms of what clients really want? Or, were you part of that process in terms of testing different things out and pivoting along the way? Because I understand you had mentioned in an interview that you guys didn't even know that this industry, this world that you're operating in, was called the marketing agency world. Right. That is, but that's what you were bringing to the table. You were bringing that fresh approach. You guys were technologists. You guys were computer science geeks first, and you were sort of outsiders to marketers, marketing, which is why you brought that fresh perspective. You introduced elements of performance marketing early on, before anyone was talking about analytics. So, what stage were they at, and how did you guys go about pivoting?
I'll probably start at the fact that we just genuinely had no idea of what an agency world is. What is an agency? Back in the day, if someone told me agency, the only thing I would come to my mind was, growing up in India, Indonesia, you had agencies for gas cylinders, or, for getting a telephone license or something of that sort. So we had very little idea. We were not trained in the marketing communications world. And I'm fairly convinced that that played out to be an advantage eventually, when you started figuring out what an agency is, what are the agency's strengths and weaknesses. So when I joined in 2011 November, Rachit and Dave had been in operations for 2 years, and their focus was on a couple of things. One is, how do we build websites and drive traffic? They were quite good in the analytics. How do we sort of use Google Analytics to tell people, today it's common it's fairly common for everyone. But back in the day, people didn't realize that, wow, okay, there could be a tool that tells me where are people coming from, what pages are they visiting, how much time spent, all of that. So I think that was Rachit's forte. Rachit's forte was really around websites, SEO, SEM, driving traffic, analytics. Dave was quite creative. So especially in the video side, I remember videos and infographics is something he used to explore, right? So that's how sort of what was being done. I remember some of our early clients were Spring Singapore, StarHub, and a few other early stage startups as well. When I came to board, in Pinstorm, my sort of area was display ads, social media, content engagement. Facebook was just beginning. Facebook, Twitter was beginning to sort of take off. So yeah, I said, you know what, I'm going to bring that scale of media to what you're doing. So we sort of, again, it wasn't a very well structured framework, but our thought process was, you know what, we'll help people build websites for conversion. So I think what we were fairly sure, in hindsight, I can use the marketing speak and say, in the funnel, I mean, our approach was always that a campaign has to be performance marketing. A campaign has to be conversion. There is no brand awareness alone. Like, in fact, we should look at it in a very negative connotation. I'm not saying it's not important. All I'm saying is, for me, at least in my head, there's nothing called just brand and performance. It goes hand in hand. I mean, if I'm a client, I wouldn't be happy saying, "Oh, great, my ads got 10 million impressions." Like, so what? So our tagline was fairly clear in a very cliched way: "Happy marketer, more business from the web." So if you are an education institute, we're going to give you more leads. If you are e-commerce, we'll obviously help you sell. So there has to be a business outcome. I think that we were fairly sure, simply because we were not marketing trained. And this is the problem with any domain. I noticed that there is so much jargon, so much vanity metrics. The focus on, oh, we're going to do, the Nielsen's will talk about GRPs, and we'll talk about CPC, CPM, we'll talk about impressions, clicks, all great. But I mean, at the end of the day, I have a very simple principle to any business or to any business person: is whether you're a salon, whether you're a happy marketer, whether you're a Dentsu, whether you're a chicken rice owner, the formula is profit equal to revenue minus cost. So as a business, I'm presuming everyone wants to make profit. Even if you're a not for profit, you want to at least balance your revenue and cost, right? So the two levers are revenue goes up, cost goes down. So whether you're an employee or whether you're a happy marketer or whether you're a larger Dentsu, the accountability is, someone had told me during my NUS days, my job hunt, when I had 7 or 10 offers, he said, look, whatever you do, remember to be in the heart of the organization. And that advice, I thought, is, I still think it's priceless. Because basically saying, if you're working in an IT services company, be in the IT tech, don't do finance. If you want to be in finance, be in a finance company, right? So essentially be at the core so that you can drive impact. And for me, whether I was an employee at Pinstorm or, when I obviously became a shareholder and employee and director at Happy Marketer, my job was very clear. Like, whatever I do, either I'm bringing in money or I'm reducing costs. So same, our marketing campaigns either had to give you higher revenue and or had to sort of do it in a more cost effective manner. So that connection to business metric, if you ask me, Prahlad, that really was, in hindsight, a key driver to our early year success. Because our pitch to every client was not, oh, wow, beautiful creative campaign, and it's going to create engagement and brand. Great. Is it help? Like, even, by the way, today we face that with a lot of jargon when I see pitches and campaigns around, oh, NFTs and metaverse. Okay, great. Is it helping me sell more burgers? Is it helping me sell more cars? If yes, okay, that's great. But to do something for the sake of it, and we started figuring this out, that most competition would talk about, oh, here's a Facebook engagement strategy. We're going to do a Facebook app and there'll be likes and comments and shares. Great, nothing wrong. But eventually, does that lead to more sales or more leads? If it doesn't, well, you might get the business, but someone's going to come. I don't think you're doing right by the client, or someone's going to come and sort of, take your pie. So I think started very early. It was sort of experimentation with different models thereafter over the next 10 years. But I think the biggest lesson or takeaway for me was more business from the web, being connected to a client's business. So to me, what is important is, if I'm being entrusted with a client's marketing dollars, am I helping their business grow? Because A, that's the right thing to do. B, selfishly, if that business grows, there's a higher probability of me getting renewals. right? Otherwise, it's very easy for someone to come and question, okay, Prantik, I gave you $500,000. Great, you gave me likes, clicks, and shares. You gave me traffic. Now, I'm not saying that you're responsible to sell all my products, but it just becomes that much more easier for them to say, look, I'm not sure, are you guys adding value? And I think that's a fundamental challenge of our domain of marketing is, most people still think of marketing as a comms role or a creative role and the art part of it and not the science. And there is very little correlation to revenue or profitability, which automatically sort of makes it feel like a cost center, which I don't think necessarily has to be. As the VC-backed startups have shown us, or even the larger banks, telcos, insurance companies that we work with, we've seen you can sort of understand what is the revenue potential given your investment. You can know what is your cost of acquisition. You can know what is your lifetime value. Hence, you can know what is your lifetime value to CAC ratio. And these are business metrics. Uh, and I think surely just sort of being from the tech world or not being from the marketing world allowed us to look at it as a business problem or as a commercial problem as opposed to a marketing problem.
I want to go a little deeper into how you went about getting business early on from clients in terms of what was the biggest hurdles that you had to overcome being an up and coming agency, and the fact that you were competing with not just other digital agencies but also the bigger players, the Dentsu those days, the WPP agencies. How did you go about setting yourself apart? I'm aware that Happy Marketer didn't really tie itself to any one particular digital channel. Like, you guys always stayed ahead of the curve, from websites to analytics to training, which was a big part of its success later on, to loyalty programs and digital campaigns. So just want to understand, what was that secret sauce when your larger clients could just go with a Dentsu those days? How did you guys set yourself apart?
Yeah, the secret sauce was really two things. I think brute force, the volume game, trying, experimenting. Because when it comes to, again, going back to accountability and responsibility, you've got to do whatever it takes to sell regularly and make profits. So I think a few things, right? When in terms of reaching out or sort of winning business, me by definition, so I think what eventually sort of got established was all of us used to sell in different capacities, but we realized who's good at what, right? So by nature, I'm generally quite social, outgoing, etc. Rachit, Dave, and eventually some of the others, very good at delivery, project management, accounting, HR, right? So we sort of fell into our natural, we gravitated towards the natural buckets, but everyone sort of chipped in. So you had a major and a minor sort of a thing, right? And so for me, I think it was really a lot about, let me sort of, carpet bomb and volume. Like I said, I was big into networking, so I would really make it a point to go and meet 4-5 new people. And for me, business is personal, personal life is business. It's one and the same thing. Because again, I never believed in this whole 9 to 5. When you're running a business, right? Everything is into it. Every dollar, every sort of second is into it, because you want to do well, you want to grow, you want to sort of help your team grow. And so the networking element was very, very powerful in hindsight. So some were through events, marketing events. Some, which I found was very useful, was networking, but not in a marketing context. Like, for example, cricket. Some of my best networks have come from the world of cricket. Because there, you're not sort of, oh, hi, I'm Prantik. Oh, hi, I'm partner at Happy Marketer. Oh, by the way, we do digital marketing, right? It's not a direct sell. It's about just meeting someone, and as part of your conversation, this is what we do. And there, I think what really helped is the way we accelerated this is, so one was networking, one was referrals. Whatever little clients we had, referrals started coming through. B was the subtle way of sort of networking and growing your network base. And one thing, it's a very tactical thing, but following up. I think what many people are not really very mindful of is, you can meet people, but the two things you've got to be mindful of is, okay, when you meeting is not enough. What is that impression that you're going to make? What is the message that you're going to share? How will and why will they remember you? For what will they remember you for? And are you following up? Right? It takes a lot of time to build. So it's not about just building a LinkedIn. We are LinkedIn friends. Hey, thereafter, have you been of value? Have you helped them? Have you sort of expressed yourself, right? So what Rachit and I were very conscious about is we've got to build our individual brands and over time happy marketer brand. So content, we were like, we've got to maximize what's in our power. So we were very, very, very aggressive in our content. So we used to do blogs. We used to do, I remember, wake up late at night and watch the Facebook Apple conferences, do live blogs. We would do a lot of happy hour videos, which were earlier recorded when Dave was around. Once Dave left and when Facebook came on, it sort of became second nature that, every week we're going to do a happy hour live on Facebook. And it could be on any topic, right? So today when I meet so many people, in fact, they now miss us doing it. They were like, look, may not remember every episode, but they knew. Prantik, digital marketing. Okay. All I want people to know is, you want digital? Okay, talk to him once, right? Because even when you're networking with cricket, maybe the person I'm playing with, maybe he's into supply chain. But maybe his wife is a CMO, right? So I think you've got to believe that, boss, you're going to maximize your network. But what matters is what is that message and impression? Do they remember you? Acha, this guy, he does digital marketing. Oh, you know what? I saw him do his happy hour live. Oh, that blog he wrote. Interesting perspective. I don't agree with it, but so that mind space of, oh, Nike equal to just do it and shoes. Hopefully in their head it was happy marketer / Prantik / Rachit. These young guys, I don't understand what they do, but something in this digital marketing, you want to find out more, speak to them, right? So that you sort of need to capture that mind space, right? So blogs, videos, events, trainings, a lot of them free initially. But we literally at one point, every week, we were out there speaking. Like I said, Singapore is fabulous. When someone tells me that, there's not enough opportunity, not true. Singapore is a very meritocratic place. I've seldom ever been rejected for meetings. Like they'll give you one chance to meet. The question is, will you get the second meeting? And that's a function of how you come across. What do you share? What do you sort of, and then are you helping them, right? So I think, in the initial years, it was this. Go meet people, make an impression, follow up, connect with them on LinkedIn, drop them a follow up note, keep them warm through blogs and videos. Again, nothing rocket science. This is your classic, rinse and repeat process, but keep at it. And again, right? And a lot of people overthink this. Oh, do you add everyone on LinkedIn? Should you add everyone? I want to be curated. Again, your choice, right? My choice is, boss, on LinkedIn, I would want to add everyone. Why not? It's the same as when I go to a networking event. How do I know who do I say hi to? I'm just saying hi to, and I'm hoping he or she is important, right? Or over time, if I am important enough, people come to me. Same way, LinkedIn is a great place to connect, right? And not with an immediate desire that there'll be an ROI tomorrow. Same, people have this question, oh, should I share on Twitter, TikTok, or Facebook? LinkedIn is professional network. Profession should all be there. No, not true. In fact, most of our leads have come from Facebook and Instagram. Because remember, at the end of the day, you're selling to a human. He could be CMO, CEO, CTO, but he or she has a home and a wife and a husband, and he or she has a life to live. They have passions and hobbies. Do you connect at a human to human level? Very important, right? So again, sometimes, and this is what I tell the young folks in my company or my group as well, that we tend to box ourselves. Oh, I am a performance marketing specialist. For God's sake, you're a human. You can be a content marketing, you can be an analytics specialist, you can be a space scientist tomorrow. So just because you come from a certain family or from a certain pedigree or with a certain degree, or just because you've been doing something for the last 3 years, unless and until that's what you desire, that's fine. I want to be the best performance marketing, or I want to be the best B2B performance marketing. That's great. But when you're running a business, it's important to have what we call a T-shaped structure. You need to have good breadth and then a depth as well, right? But without that breadth, you can't have meaningful conversations with senior folks in an organization. If I don't have a good sense of the geopolitical situation or of the stock market or what's happening in the sporting world or what's happening in, let's say, the commodities world, I can't just be, speaking to someone about Google ads and CPC. Then my perspective is very, very limited, right? Nothing wrong with it. All I'm saying is breadth is important, because if you need the bigger dollars, you need to be able to connect with the CFOs and CEOs, and they probably give a damn about CPC. They probably don't even know what that means. I need to be able to build rapport with them by using their language, right? So I need to be able to speak their business language. So this whole boxing yourself into buckets is a big risk. And when you're doing business, I think it's important to, again, like I can't tell you, right? There are so many smart, good business folks who connect with the customers at a different level. Nothing, best salespeople don't sell, but the transaction happens. And that's because there is trust. That's because there is credibility and authority, which doesn't have to come from a sales pitch. In fact, I'm a big believer, and I've shared this with a lot of colleagues as well, that pitching is not the right answer, because everyone can pitch, everyone can make PowerPoint decks. Idea is, what can you do so that people come to you? What can you do so that you build credibility, authority, so people come to you for advice and the transaction happens? And that can be through pottery, it can be through coffee chat, it could be through cricket or soccer, it could be through being friends at the gym. So many different things. You've got to be able to connect at a human level for good business to happen. Otherwise, you may get an occasional pitch win, all of that. But if you can't connect with customers as humans, very difficult to sustain.
Great point about networking there. I just want to transition to some tips you would give in the context of networking. I asked this specifically because I'm in Singapore as well, and it's only for the past 1 month or so that legally you're allowed to have events. And so I've been pretty much every evening after office, I'm at one of these startup events or a casual networking dinner. And like you said, you cannot be transactional about it. You just have to be genuinely interested in getting to know the other person, building rapport through, having that breadth and being able to talk about different things and connect ideas. And so that's fantastic. But I really felt that I was missing out on that for about 2 years during COVID, right? I didn't want to use that as an excuse, but the truth is that I connected with far less people, far less new people, like you said, every week. And I didn't want to use that as an excuse. So I tried to maximize in terms of online events and proactively scheduling meets with people, but it was still limited. I just want to know, what are your thoughts? Because there are still many parts of the world that are, in sort of a quasi-lockdown state. What are your thoughts in terms of potential to network without being in person, or at least initiating it online and then probably in person? Just tips on, so that people don't use COVID as a crutch to say, well, no events are happening, no networking, that kind of thing. So what tips would you have in the age we live in? And probably tomorrow it's, we meet people on the metaverse. But what are your thoughts in terms of networking beyond just depending on events?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I mean, firstly, yes, it's indeed harder to network online. But I'll sort of reframe that by saying this, right? Let's say in Singapore, you live in Singapore, there are 5.5 million people. And let's say there are about 1 million professionals, and maybe of which, let's say in the physical world and the non-pandemic world, maybe 100,000 are relevant people, right? And, maybe for all practical purposes, you can network with 100,000, right? But now, if you flip it to, I want to connect with the best CMOs around the world, right? Even in a non-pandemic world, you've got to make the first few steps online, right? So firstly, you have to acknowledge how blessed we are to living in the internet era, where that's even a plausible thought experiment. That today, if I really want, I can connect with a CMO of a telco in Africa, right? And so the moment you reframe it that way, you start realizing that COVID or a pandemic can't be a crutch, because you're not that you're going to fly to Africa every week and start networking. You're going to try and make introductions online, or even when you make business trips, you typically try and connect with people online, either through friends, referrals, through LinkedIn, through cold emails, whatever that works for you. So all I'm saying is the starting point is a desire, is an ambition and a desire as to who do I want to network, or even one step further. Step 0 is, why do I want to network, right? Now, if you have a clear why of that network, of course, eventually everyone wants to have a business transaction, because you want to, by having a better network, you'll sell more, or, you'll get access to better products, etc., etc. But I think you've got to be clear of the why. So for me, I think the why, a genuine why for me, and again, the whys for different people are different, right? Again, and I always give this example. Rachit by nature is an introvert, and I don't think he's that excited about going to a networking event and meeting tons of people. But I think if he's in a smaller private setting of 4-5 people, I think he finds it more conducive, and he would open up way more. For me, I like the volume. I would rather meet 30 people one evening, exchange cards, get to know the surface level, then I'll follow up, right? But again, if you have that why, that for him, let's say it would be about making intimate connections with people in the industry and talk about few deep things. For me, it's just about maybe just to meet new people, to understand their perspective on specific issues. Or I should love going to these conferences just to sort of learn how do people pitch, how do people present, how do they make their slides, how do they dress, or their cultural background. So I have a general sort of curiosity towards people and culture, and to the point we were making earlier about being immigrants and sort of learning and adapting. So I think once you sort of have that connection or the why, then the next step is of that ambition and desire that, what, okay, let's sort of make it into a process. You can't leave it to chance, by the way. Anything that you want to get good at, like you said, you're now going every week, you're going attending events because perhaps you found your why, perhaps you are interested, and it's become second habit. But at some point, you've got to make a process saying, what, I'm going to go for two, three events this week. Many of them will be bogus. Many of them may not lead to good sort of networks. But again, if you keep it into a rhythm, suddenly, let's say if you say, I want to meet one new person per week, at the end of a year, that's 52 people. At the end of 5 years, 250 people. And that's just simple math. But normally, it compounds. So one of the things that people need to realize that as much as compounding interest in a bank is critical, compounding interest of your time, your talent, and your network is perhaps equally powerful. So that 50 actually doesn't become 100 in year 2, probably becomes 300. 300 becomes 1,000 by year 3, year 4. Because, when you meet one friend, they invite you, friends beget more friends, so on and so forth. So I think it's about putting a smart goal, putting a number and a process to it, and then sort of running with it, right? So to me, pandemic should not be an excuse, because moment you flip it that, you want to sort of grow into a global network, that's when you realize, anyway, you're in Singapore, which is one of the smallest countries. So yes, it's always good to meet people, but how long can you sort of meet people one by one? You can continue doing that. You should do that, but you can also be strategic and say, hey, in the ideal world, if God gave me all the powers, who are the 50, 100,000 people I want to meet, right? And you can make that ideal wish list. Chances are, if you have those 100, maybe 80 of them you'll never meet in life. But hey, at least you have 20 that you might still meet by year 5, right? But it's important to have that ambition and that goal and write it down, right? In fact, I have quite a few people who actually do that actively. In fact, I have some podcast hosts who have this wish list saying, in the next 10 years, I want to be sort of, it might sound silly to you and me saying, oh, I saw this list which said I want to interview Elon Musk and Bill Gates. Most of us would laugh at it, but nothing wrong. That's someone's ambition. He may not get to Elon, but he may get to, I don't know, he may get to maybe the CEO of Carousel, or Anthony Dunn from Grab, which is not bad, right? So I think you make that desire, you make that wish list, you make a process, put a number to it, and just get on with it, and just sort of show up. Oh, you know what? I'm going to send out in the virtual world. Maybe I'm going to send out 3 LinkedIn, emails or messages to some of these people. They may not respond. Some may respond. Sometimes I may ask referrals. What's in your control is no one should be able to sort of curtail your ambition, your desire, and the process, and then the effort to follow through. That's in your control, right? So it is really about why you want to do something, and thereafter putting a process and following through. So, in fact, a lot of people tell me, oh, I want to do MBA from INSEAD, Harvard, this. I said, why? Why do you want to spend $200,000 and 2 years of your youth, doing this? And the common answer is network. Sure. All I can tell them is, look, truth of the matter is you can build a network with Harvard people even sitting in Singapore. And there is no guarantee that just by being in the class, Harvard class, you want to be friends with everyone. In fact, there are many who I realize have told me in hindsight, not only did the network not happen, because someone said, oh, you know what, when I landed up in the Harvard class, oh, so happened my class had younger people than me and the network wasn't great. So you were willing to take a chance of 200K, and bang, on day one, you realize, damn, my network is not the one that I wanted. Was that a good bet? Even if they were great people, again, like I said, it is not about, oh, they're in my class or I have a Harvard email ID. That's not going to help you. Do you have a personal connect? Do you have something to offer? Is there reciprocity? Is there some sort of connection or a bond, right? Sure, helps to be in the same proximity, but I think a lot of it can sort of happen even remotely, right? And especially if the messaging and the common connection is clear. So for anyone who sort of wants to go about networking, start with your why, set out your ambition, put a process, just trust the process and follow through. In 10 years, when you look back, or 5 years, you look back, be like, wow, okay, I thought I didn't like networking, but suddenly I know 10,000 people. You know,
in terms of networking, fantastic point. In terms of how it really doesn't matter where you are. Like, you happen to be in Singapore, we happen to be here, and we happen to have bumped in at office. But this interview could have happened completely online. In fact, I've reached out to a couple of people who are not even close. One of which is Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy. I'm trying to schedule something with him. And so that just brings me to just transitioning into like Ogilvy over there, as well as the rest of the marketing agencies and the consulting world. I just wanted to know, going back to Happy Marketer, as you were scaling the company, did you have sort of North Stars as to one day you want to be this, right? Was that a marketing agency? Was that like a tech company? I know you have mentioned that you and Rachit were inspired by leaders in Accenture, Wipro, Capgemini, sort of people-based companies. Could you talk a little bit about that as to what, did you even have a North Star? Is it important for a company to have a certain idea of where they're going, or should that happen naturally over time, or should that be something that should be clear on very early?
Yeah, I'll tell you where our headspace was versus also what's ideal. I think if someone has that clarity, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs do, that's great. I think it's really, really very good to sort of know who you want to be, and more importantly, who you don't want to be. I think for us, it happened over time. I think when we started, we just started, with the desire to build websites and drive traffic. We didn't know what marketing agencies were. But I think at some point, as you start experimenting, pivoting, that clarity starts coming, because you also sort of start realizing the importance of not just what you want to be and what your North Star is. We've got to be humble and acknowledge the environment you operate in, the macro environment I operate in. If when we started, we wanted to be a IT services company or a BPO company, maybe we were too late, right? So a lot of, I think my realizations are, we tend to worry a lot about the micro details and think that every decision is, it has to be a very difficult one. It's irreversible. We've got to panic. We've got to be very worried. Not true. Sometimes, if you take care of some of the bigger stones, the bigger macro environment factors, the very fact, for example, that we live in Singapore, or we happen to live in Singapore, takes care of a lot of things. Lower taxes, meritocratic society. Had I started the same Happy Marketer business in India or Jakarta, it would have been a very different environment. The sheer competition, the ability for customers to be able to pay, the maturity of organization, right? So, of course, it happened by chance for us. But again, if someone is sort of doing it as a management case study or sort of planning to do this, I think the macro environments of where you're operating, who are your partners, in which era are you in, what is the economic situation. I think if a lot of those things people don't give credit to, right? So when they say timing, to me, it's also about the macroeconomic environment and the timing, right? So that's one. The other is, yes, as we sort of year 3, year 4, we realize that, okay, you know what? I think we are in the marketing agency category. Very quickly, we started looking at, the marketing agency world and their strengths and weaknesses, right? And we constantly debated about this, right? Because yes, we did come from the IT services. Rachit's father is a career IBMer, so we had a lot of advice and a lot of information as to how do these software companies work. I had worked at Accenture, right? So, for example, a few things I realized over time that what sort of so we were very much. You asked me if you had asked me then as well. We were more in the camp of an IT services company or a consulting company because we were familiar. We had seen that model, and a lot of that sort of also attracted us. And then, especially when we sort of contrasted it with the traditional agency model, we saw the merits in the operating model of the Accentures, IBMs, Wipros, TCS. Because few things, right? I think one of the biggest challenges of the agency model is lack of repeatability. When you're doing IT services, you are taught to make, like when we learned computer engineering, there was a whole philosophy of how do you make modular software, which can be sort of scaled over time, where you can reuse. right? But in the agency world, what you see is pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch, and that's draining. And when there are articles in the magazines about industry pitching, no one's paying pitch fees. I'm sorry, but I've written about this over the years. We agencies are to be blamed because if there are, you think of it in a dynamic situation in a market, if you're a buyer, if there are 20 agencies dying for your business, the power in the macro situation is with the buyer. The buyer will exploit in the market to get pitch decks, from everyone, pitch decks from everyone, and not pay for it. Why should they pay for it, right? So the lack of repeatability was a big one. Then scalability and predictability of revenue. What we loved from the IT services and the eventual SaaS business model is the fact that in the IT services, they think long term. They think 3-year contracts, 5-year contracts. In marketing, we think campaign, very short term myopic thinking. And then, and this, it sort of, and this has struck us, over the years as we sort of read and learned. Like, for everyone listening, people who know me would have heard me quote this, that there was an article in the Harvard Business Review cover story in, I think, 2017. And this coincided with one of our pitches to a bank, where the article was really about, why do CMOs leave or why do CMOs die? Something of that sort. But essentially, Kimberly, the author, had really gone deep to understand, essentially why, what she said, the premise was in a boardroom, CMOs have the shortest shelf life and the least budget. And then I read that, I'm like, damn, I'm building my business, dealing with the worst possible stakeholders, so to speak. And why is that? And it coincided with our pitch, which in a large bank. It so happened the pitch was with the CTO and the team because it was some data analytics project. And I actually lived through that. The CTO, firstly, we were competing against McKinsey, Capgemini, etc. That was a great feeling. B, we saw that the pitch brief was not about, hey, come and pitch a campaign. It was about, hey, give me a 5-year roadmap. The language is different. So he's thinking 5 years. A typical marketer thinks 3 years to 1 year max. Even there, I'll give you AOR, but every campaign come up with fresh ideas. It's a very inefficient business model, to be honest, right? In the CTO model, there is CAPEX and OPEX. In the marketing model, there's only OPEX. And Kimberly is an academician. She sort of studied this across industries globally. So she's like, look, a marketer, firstly, short-term thinking, low budgets. Why low budgets? Because she said typically the CEO thinks of it as a cost center. And that is why when a crisis strikes, like perhaps the environment we are in right now this year, marketing budgets will always get cut. In fact, marketers, after travel and entertainment, marketing and ad budgets are the first to be cut because people don't have a perceived value. And I think, again, we marketers are to be blamed because we just think of it as, historically marketing was about the ad and the creative, very hard to sort of, do attribution modeling. Today, we're doing that for clients. That, hey, when you spend $1 million, is it helping you sell more credit cards? If it's not, what's the point? Any logical CEO is going to cut your budget because he or she doesn't know that the investment, he doesn't see it as an investment. He sees it as a cost, right? So there's a huge perceived value issue. There's a business model issue because you're pitching in an environment. Tell me any other industry where someone pitches. When you go to a hotel, does the hotel come and say, oh, take a hotel room for free and I'm going to pitch my hotel to you? No. You want to come, live in my hotel, take my room, pay for it, right? No one's pitching except marketing agencies, right? And this is a huge challenge, right? IT services, yes, they are pitching, but it's for a much larger price. There's CAPEX, OPEX. Profitability margins are higher, something we learned from the consulting firms. We were fortunate to, around the same time, work with the BCGs of the world. We were strategic partners, and I was amazed. I should jokingly tell my partner that buddy, you guys are magicians. You guys can sell PowerPoints for $10 million. And here I'm giving my PowerPoint pitches for free. Think of the irony. I every week make pitches, late night pitches, free. Because again, I'm underselling myself. The fault is with me, right? So the business model is an issue. The other thing is product. We don't make a product. We just pure services, right? Huge issue. There is no intellectual property, right? Automatically and again, I've got to be very careful here because we love abusing the word product and productize. For me, there is either a product or there's no product. There is no productize. right? Either I have a Google Analytics, the product. I mean, I don't believe in this thing of, oh, I have, because the moment you say productize, automatically my next question is, you mean you have 10 PowerPoint slides? That's not a product. A product is a system or a tool that helps you do something at a at a sustainable, scalable level. And you're not writing the source code sort of every day. It's made. Yes, you improve upon it, but that's a product. There is no productize. So I think you've got to be. So during that process, we realized that again, nothing wrong. And I'm going to be very, very clear that it is, agencies are very successful businesses. You look at the big ones, small ones, you're making money, you're making profit. All I'm saying is there's a huge room for change and instrumental change to drive higher profitability and scale. At the same time, driving better work-life balance. Because we talk about this in agencies, that we're always stressed, always working late nights. To the extent we take pride in that. Oh, the agency life culture. And we've got to start questioning that, right? Because it's not sustainable, right? And we are seeing that through the pandemic, through the great resignation, that people have figured that, you can not only make more money, you probably can have a very different sort of life where you're working for product companies. When people work for Facebook, Google's, or other SaaS companies, I'm not saying their lives are not stressful. All I'm saying is it's a very different model, right? So going back to your bigger question, when we learned that there's a difference in the business model, there's no repeatability, no product element, no intellectual property, scaling is harder because every year you're pitching. That's when we said, what we want to. So at one point in time, by year 7, year 8, in fact, the funny story is, it's sort of the trigger point was when Rachit was getting married. His wife is Japanese. His then to be father-in-law asked him for a business plan, because obviously he's going to get his daughter married. He want to get a sense of who this dude is who's running this little company. And to be very honest, that is the first time we formally made a business plan, right? Of course, on an Excel sheet, every business plan looks great. You're all moving to the top right. But it sort of allowed us to do a theoretical exercise. And I think to your question, we were very impressed by the Infosys, growing up in India or in an Indian environment, we were impressed by Infosys Wipro. And we said, wow, if in 30 odd years they could get to $1 billion, our plan was, hey, maybe, if we stuck it along for the next 30, 40 years. So we had this business plan, we laugh about it. That, what, maybe we're going to conquer the world in 30, 40 years. We're going to expand to multiple countries. We'll have strategic partnerships, etc. But we wanted to sort of mirror the model of an IT services company, an Accenture, IBM, McKinsey, BCG, because there they knew how to sort of sell their ideas, their PowerPoints for higher value. They at least made them into frameworks. They were good at repeatability. They were good at sort of, the process. At the Accenture of the world, when I used to intern, their fabulous process. They were great at utilization. It was, if you worked for Accenture, you could be deployed, same with McKinsey, BCG, you could be deployed for projects in Indonesia today, Mexico tomorrow, right? It is not, looking at just the market you operate in. So a lot of things to be learned from both the IT services, consulting, and the SaaS, which is, of course, a very different product startup world. But I think that world sort of drew us, saying, again, we didn't want to, because we don't know what an agency, we didn't know what it is, we didn't want to sort of box ourselves. We went back to core principles of, scaling up a business. So we did a course with Vern Hamish called Scaling Up. And it was about how do you get not just scalable, but predictable revenue. When we first heard that term, we were like, wow, how is that even possible? But we said, no, if you have certain, if your value proposition is clear, if your positioning is clear, if you have repeatable frameworks, if not products, you can sort of have scalable revenue, which is also kind of predictable, which is what the SaaS model is, right? So when you're curious, you do these courses, you speak to people from the SaaS world or the IT consulting world, you partner with organizations like BCG, you have these learnings. And it was important for us to sort of adapt to that. And that's the path we sort of chose, as far as business model is concerned. Over time, we sort of pivoted towards the predictable, scalable revenue model. And I think what we were always very clear, because we were not venture backed, is we had to be profit first. And a book that sort of really influenced us is called Profit First. Is to base, and this principle could apply to your personal life, where the principle really is, if you make $100 of salary, for the first 10 years of my life, like a fool, I would spend everything, and whatever was left, if at all, was my saving, which was nothing. In hindsight, I wish I didn't do that. The same principle applies in the business world. Is you get to choose. You should choose how much profit you want to make. You should choose how much you want to save. So if you get $1,000 of salary in your DBS account, you decide. You know what? $300 is my saving automatically into a savings account. I'm not going to touch it. The rest 700 you can spend or invest guilt free because it's important to enjoy life. Same with our business. We said, you know what? So when Hamish sort of taught us this principle, we're like, wow, this is phenomenal. We've got to be in control of our profits. We decided, you know what, this year we're going to make 35% profit. Bang. We kept the profit aside. And it's like back in school, if a teacher gives you 3 days for homework, and if someone gives you 1 day for homework, you know that you know the answer. You're going to do the homework in 1 day. Work stretches. Same way with money. You tell yourself you have only $1,000 to live in a month, you will live in $1,000. If you have 100,000, I'm sure you can spend it in a day as well, right? These things expand. So it's a great question on business model. I could go on for hours, but I think fundamentally, anyone doing any sort of business, again, go back to that principle of profit equal to revenue minus cost. And what's the most sustainable, scalable, predictable way of doing it? And don't box yourself that just because this is, I hate or dislike the word, this is industry norm. There is nothing, yes, it could be a practice, but that's what you've got to question. That's what you've got to experiment. You could fall flat. You could be wrong. But I think there's so much to learn from different business models. And I think that's an innovation that a lot of companies don't do. People think innovation is only tech innovation, but business model innovation can be a massive moat, can be a great strength.
Fantastic points all through there. I just want to mention, if anyone wants to check out the article about CMOs, it's Why CMOs Never Last on Harvard Business Review. Fantastic article on, and fantastic point also on how there's operational expenses and there's capital expenses, and marketing, it's typically you just spend without actually investing in something that scales, and that's how the IT companies were different, and that's how you positioned yourself to be more consulting than marketing. That's right. Yeah.
Consulting and like tech services
and implementation,
data analytics services.
Much more consulting and implementation. Sort of got it. And
the right word in our industry would be, the Accentures call themselves as consulting and systems integration. Very honestly, we're probably more of that. In fact, that is how the whole Merkle thing happened, because Merkle themselves globally.
Let's go there. Let's go there. So that's exactly where I wanted to transition. You're talking about business model and how predictable revenue was a big part of how your strategy was different from other agencies and how you set yourself apart. And it's also a big reason why Merkle was attracted to acquire you guys to expand their presence in Southeast Asia. So can you talk about what that process was like, how you went about that dance with Ted Bray from Merkle? How long did it take? What were the concerns you and Rachit had in terms of how life is going to be different when you're not you have someone to report to, I guess, and now you're in your last year of the earnout period, and so you're an MD here at Dentsu. What has it been like going from just working with Rachit to now being part of this larger Merkle and Dentsu family?
Yeah, let me start with I guess the dance with Ted Bray. That's a good that's a good sort of chapter to talk about. I was glad to meet him a couple of weeks ago when he was in town, and and again, I want to tie it back to your earlier point of networking and believing and having faith in the power of serendipity. Right, things connect. I think many of your audiences would have seen that famous speech from Jobs about connecting dots, and I think it's true. Like you said, to your point, we built that business plan. We were running, things were profitable, things were growing. We were very happy. But one fine day, we had drinks with, we were connected to Ted Bray through one of Rachit and my closest friends from university, Shivanu Shukla, who runs an edtech company called Teamy. And Shivanu and Ted used to work. Shivanu was at Frost & Sullivan in the market research consulting space. Ted Bray was his client. And, this is how networks work. Ted Bray had moved on, then he came back as Merkle, and he reached out to Shivanu saying, hey, I'm looking to sort of buy a marketing agency for Merkle. Do you know anyone? Right? One thing leads to the other. Shivanu connects us. We have drinks at Clarkey and at Lantern. And Ted being Ted, very softly, very respectfully, sort of very openly, yet respectfully brings the topic, saying, "Hey guys, I work for Merkle. Here's my ambition for Merkle for APAC as a growth officer, as the lead, and I'm looking to buy. And I just want to sort of reach out and meet." To be honest, in hindsight, it was a long 2-year journey.
And at this point, Rachit or yourself never thought about exit strategy?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
We were very, very sure of sort of running this. And what we had planned though was for succession planning, that for folks like Sanchit, Terence, Avdesh, Emily, Trish, etc. There was a path. Hopefully, they could sort of take it over from there, right? That was the plan. But we were in our sort of early 30s, and we sort of wanted to run it. There was a lot of steam in the engine, so to speak. So to be honest, of that 2-year period and that dance, I think the first 6-8 months was us being confused and naive, and simply because this is not part of our plan, right? It suddenly came on upon our lap, and we were like, "Hey, does it make sense? What does this even mean? What is the process? We don't come from a finance M&A background." So we said no. But again, Ted was very respectful, but he kept the engagement going. Ted, as he keeps joking that, at his heart, he's a salesman and he takes along the picture. So, there was no push. He said, absolutely no worries. I totally understand. But every few months, we would catch up. He would share what Merkle is doing. He said, what, why don't we sort of collaborate on some projects? You guys are great at Google Analytics. We do some analytics. We do some Adobe Analytics. We do some CRM. So, we had some few common pitches and projects that we sort of spoke about and just generally kept in touch, right? Again, networking. You just want to keep in touch just as friends, right? As human beings. And we told them, look, if you're not selling, we'll connect you with other agencies who I think, could be useful. And then I think a trigger point was one of the original founders of Merkle, David Williams. He was supposed to be in town in Singapore. So Ted very cleverly said, "Hey, why don't you guys meet him, right? Just for a simple lunch." And Rachit caught up with him, and impressive gentleman. What we liked about those early Merkle conversations were three things, right? They're entrepreneurs, right? So when Merkle pitched, he's built this $1 billion business in 30 years. It's a data-driven business. So I think the product fit was great because they were like an Accenture systems integrator. In fact, it was funny. Over time, as discussions progressed, they used to call us mini Merkle, either as a pitch strategy or just coincidentally it happened. Their offering chart, Merkle has this famous Merkle burger chart. Very weirdly, it matched with Happy Marketer's offering chart, right? We do a lot of data analytics at the foundation layer. We do a lot of paid ads, performance marketing. There's a whole transformation consulting and training layer at the top. So the cultural fit seemed good. Their understanding of entrepreneurs and our anxieties and our ambitions was great. And so that gave us a lot of confidence, right? Learning from their journey, how they went from zero to $1 billion, that was fabulous. Then, they asked us very directly, what are your ambitions? So we told them, look, we wanted to take, Happy from Singapore to Southeast Asia, eventually in APAC. And we were in a very good direction, and I think a lot of it was because of our partnerships with folks such as Google, HubSpot, BCG. They were taking us places, and very great partnerships, and we're doing really well. And these were things that even Merkle started appreciating. So it was a two-way sort of mutual admiration saying, hey, group guys, yes, we are 30 years old. Yes, we are $1 billion, but we have no presence in Southeast Asia. And you guys seem to be great culture fit, great product fit. The model just seemed to, resonate. And then they asked our ambition. We shared our business plan. And they sort of broadly came back and said, hey, look, what if we partner in some model that allows you to sort of get to your ambitions in quicker time? Would that be of interest? Why don't we sort of explore? Then we sort of gradually started getting interested, saying, okay, this is interesting. So the conversation was not like, hey, come, I'm going to buy you, right? The end result could be the same, but I think alignment of ambitions, the human connection again matters, right? Because again, like it or not, there is a human element, there's an ego element. You've built something, you want to be you also want to ensure that who you're selling to is the right place for your people. So one of the first things we said is, one of the non-negotiables was no one gets to touch our people, because by then, we were 50 plus people. We are extremely proud of the Happy Tribe. We knew that there's a magic formula somewhere there. In fact, David Williams spoke very often about the Merkle culture. In fact, there's a wonderful Merkle culture document in the Merkle university, and in fact, post acquisition, he used to share a lot about it. And a particular statement that really resonated with me from David was, there are two kinds of people. You're either a passive resident or you're an active citizen. Whether it's in your condo, your community, or your country, you got to choose. And I think what I liked in his statements always was he wanted Merkle folks to be active citizens. You've got to be proactive. You've got to want to make a change. You've got to, you can't want change and say, oh, I'm not going to do it. I want someone else to do it. That's the classic human nature, right? Not in my backyard. I'm not doing it. Let someone else take care, right? So those conversations, the kind of work they were doing with Google, as again, Google's a huge partner for Merkle, the kind of large scale loyalty deals they were doing, the fact that they were beating Accenture. So that was great. And then as part of the next stage of the dance, we said, okay, you know what, we'll entertain this, but if you're doing this, we're going to go to the market. So we hired a very good boutique iBanker called SI Partners, and we hired a very good law firm called Gibson, Dunn and Partners. Very, very fortunate to have them because SI Partners sort of helped us structure our narrative, clean our books. We were running a small shop, so we were running on Excel sheet, but they put some structure and thought. They knew what buyers wanted. They made us understand that there are different kinds of buyers. You just don't have to sell to agencies. So, we went to consulting firms, we went to family-owned businesses. We had some high net worth individuals from Indonesia, China who wanted to buy. And that was a fascinating process to understand M&A, to understand mergers and acquisitions of who are the buyers, what are their motivations, why do they want to buy, different valuation models. So, for example, there were a lot of agencies who wanted to buy. Unfortunately, the consulting firm said we were too small, so that wasn't going to. Our initial plan was to go and speak to the Accentures and McKinseys, but we didn't fit the bill. But a lot of family-owned businesses or individuals came to buy, and with some very decent financial offers. But we never understood why would an agriculture company from China
better offers than Merkle as well. Right?
Yeah, better offers than Merkle, right? So in a typical agency services model, you get acquired, you get some money, the rest you have to earn out based on your performance. But these families were like, hey, I'm going to give you a much higher upfront, take it and leave, right? That's very interesting. Wow. But very different motivations, right? If it was purely maths and money, obviously those offers made sense. But I think for us, like I said, our people mattered a lot. So there, what typically happens, their motivation is to get a Singapore citizenship or a PR through that investment. So they don't care about the company. They would buy it. They would show commitment to Singapore, get citizenship, PR, close the company. All right. And, but for us, it was sort of kind of different, right? So with that, I think we sort of shortlisted that, okay, we're going to sell to the agencies because at least our people will have a good home if they sort of want to. And amongst the agencies, the best model was with Merkle and Dentsu because of all the reasons I shared.
So at this point in time, Dentsu hadn't fully acquired Merkle, right? So what was their role in the picture?
Yeah, so Dentsu is the parent company, and Dentsu had acquired Merkle. So typically the acquisition is 100%, but the earnout process, you technically, it's a bit of a mishmash, right? If I'm to understand correctly, is the company is acquired 100%, but the payouts happen in installments, right? And the acquisitions are blessed by Dentsu because ultimately Dentsu, the parent company, benefits, right? It's part of Dentsu's plans. Dentsu's whole game plan was let's acquire Merkle to have the CXM pillar, and then let's allow enable Merkle to acquire mini Merkles in India, Southeast Asia, Australia, China, so that in APAC, because in APAC there was no Merkle. So through acquisitions, Merkle grew here. So yeah, and then the negotiations process started. To your question, it was very, very emotionally draining because again, you're still running and growing the business by day. Negotiations can be hard and stressful, whether it's the economics, whether it's the clauses. So there were multiple times when, on evenings we would say, hey, we're not doing this. You know what? We are backing off. This is not worth it. So really lucky that, we have very good bunch of co-founders and partners like Sanchit, Avdesh, who sort of keep the business growing. Rachit and I would focus on the M&A process. Very fortunate to have good lawyers because we realize having good law firms are absolutely essential because it's not just about the law. It's about their experience in the law. It's about their brand name. It's their precedence. It's that persona that sort of is negotiating there. Also, SI partners, apart from helping us with the narrative, with the valuation, it's just someone simply making you realize after meetings that, hey guys, listen, you don't have to sell, right? And that's one of the best things, like I said earlier, best salespeople don't sell. If you're selling your business, you've got to be selling it when you don't need to sell it, right? Should be in a position to walk off every time. That you've got to. That's got to be a bargaining chip. Otherwise, you can't negotiate strongly because, and you've got to realize that this is a once in a lifetime moment. You've spent 10, 12 years. For Rachit, it's 15 years. You've put in a lot of effort, not just you, but your families and many other families. And so you've got to give it your all. So it took 18, 24 months. Finally, Feb 2019, the deal happened. Of course, to your question of post acquisition, it's a very different world. Of course, we went from Tanjung Pagar to Tanjung Pagar in 12 years, but we went from a shop house to a massive building in Goko Towers. You're back to wearing formal clothes. You're back to sort of carrying your name tags. You're doing timesheets. Obviously, in a large organization, you have a process, right? In a smaller company, you don't need to have a process from various things. So it is different. Year one was obviously quite sort of a difficult stage because environment is different. You want to make new friends. You're trying to understand the culture. Also, year one for us in Dentsu was difficult because, as many would know, it's in the public domain. Dentsu was going through massive changes. So, 80% of the people who were involved in our M&A were not there in Dentsu anymore. So you start getting jittery, saying, "Wow, who did I sell to?" Those people are not there. But again, very thankful to folks such as Prakash. I think Prakash coming on board was a game changer for us. He's built such a wonderful exec team, leadership team. He sort of got Sanchit and me into leadership positions in the exec that made us comfortable, that sort of gave us a sense of purpose.
For those who aren't following Prakash Kamdar is Dentsu Singapore CEO.
Yeah, and today now he's the CEO of Indonesia as well. And also what helps is Prakash is an entrepreneur himself who sold his business to Dentsu. So he could relate to our issues, our ambitions. So it's been wonderful. And I've told this to people that without Prakash and the leadership team, Yvonne, Carol, Sharan, Phil, Prerna, Pankaj Prema today, and everyone else of the exec team, it would have been very different, very difficult. So very blessed to have that team. So we've sort of built that collaborative culture across in Singapore. Today we also sort of help other markets for Dentsu, like in Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, because if you remember, our ambition was to sort of drive growth in Southeast Asia. So a bit of that is happening as well. And so yeah, that's been that journey. Of course, very happy that 90% of our team has stuck along. They're committed to stay through the 4-year journey. They've been by working with Merkle, and with Merkle, I guess the value is the access to resources, access to global clients, access to processes. It starts forcing you to think big because you're sort of working under an umbrella that's gone from where we are in terms of our size to $1 billion plus. So you sort of learn what's taken them there. You can sort of mirror and mimic that. Not everything would work in this part of the world, but a lot of it will, right? So the sales rigor, following your pipeline, maximizing your partnerships, that's been great, right? Being able to collaborate with other service lines. It's not easy, but I think, again, like I said, it's ultimately down to the people. And really, really fortunate to have worked with Prakash, Phil, Prerna, and everyone else to just sort of figure out our niche. And overall, I think, obviously pandemic, non-pandemic, like I said, I've always believed in general as a principle, you can only control that much. And if certain macroeconomic factors are in your favor, like I said, by surely being in Singapore, being in the era of digital and internet, even despite the pandemic, in fact, just today we were looking at certain numbers. In the pandemic year of 2021, we had 50% plus growth, which again, we are very blessed because certain pivots in the data analytics stream really, really helped us. So it's a cliche. So even with founders right now, everyone's worried about the volatility, uncertainty in Ukraine, China, inflation. Yes, it is going to be a tight, difficult 1 year, but there's always a silver lining. There's always a chance if you're curious and willing to try, experiment, and do something. Because if you want to be a resilient, strong business, whether you're VC backed or otherwise, you've got to take a 50, 100-year perspective, right? which means automatically by that definition, you've got to survive negative cycles every 8, 10 years. Uh, so it's very important, I think. And again, philosophically, if you're very clear of why you're doing something, who you are sort of surrounding yourself with, are you learning? Are you sort of growing? Are you experimenting? I think a lot of the results sort of start taking care of itself.
Let's now transition into what you're doing in the investing world, what you're doing as both a VC as well as an angel investor. Tell us about the multiple VC firms you're involved with, and what are your focus areas, whether that's just in the region here in Southeast Asia or globally as well. What kind of companies and sectors do you focus on in your investments?
Sure. I'll probably fundamentally start with why I sort of started looking at this, because prior to 2019, like I said, I hardly saved, I hardly invested. Everything was sort of profits were reinvested into the Happy Marketer business. But once the exit happened, I had a bit of time and a bit of capital, and also I wanted to sort of figure out what next, right? In the next 10, 15 years of my career, and right through my government days to my SMEs to obviously Happy Marketer. One common thread has been startups. So I think I said, I'm going to spend some time, my evenings and my weekends, on three things: being an angel investor and advisor to early stage startups in Southeast Asia and India, which is where my network is; being a limited partner in a few VCs, and maybe mentor some of the portfolio companies if and when needed; and third is to sort of give back through organizations such as INSEAD, which has a wonderful structured entrepreneur in residence program, and also the TIE network. TIE is a global body for entrepreneurs. It's a body of entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs, by entrepreneurs and investors. So that's how sort of spread my time to just sort of stay connected and vicariously live the founder life, especially on the product startup side, because I've only run a services startup. So that's the sort of why or the genesis of all of this. And in terms of, as you rightly said, bulk of my portfolio is in Southeast Asia and India in the early stage. My areas of interest has been primarily in the B2B space and in the domains of fintech, insurtech, health tech, edtech, and maybe B2B software. I haven't done too many e-commerce or consumer web or B2C companies, simply because I just think, I generally understand the B2B element better. I think scaling that is relatively much easier than B2C, way more expensive. You've got to be able to raise a lot of cash. So that's sort of my general investment thesis on the early stage. The late stage ones I started doing, to sort of be part of some of these financial opportunities, but also to sort of hedge my bets, because obviously the early stage is very risky. So to sort of hedge my bets, to sort of have access to liquidity in the near term, because the late stage could, go typically SPAC, IPO, or strategic exits in 2 to 3 years, whilst the early stage ones could take 7, 10 years, right? So I wanted to sort of hedge my bets. So that was the sort of three buckets of early stage investments: limited partners in VCs such as HealthX Capital, in Rebel, in Good Startup, which looks at alternate protein, and Quest Ventures, which again primarily looks at B2C, consumer web companies, right? So a bit diversified in the VC portfolio, about 30 plus early stage startups where I'm an investor and an advisor. And on the late stage, there are maybe about 10, some names that you mentioned, like Palantir, UiPath, Stripe, SpaceX, and a few more. So that's how I sort of designed my, investment thesis and my execution plan over the last 3-4 years. And with the early stage company, I think one thing that I learned initially is, investing is one thing, but what I also wanted to do is sort of, like I said, live the founder life vicariously and to sort of learn. And hence, I think what I've enjoyed is the other positions where I'm both an investor and an advisor. And again, advisor, if and only when my time or my inputs are worthwhile. So if the founder says,
how,
hey,
how often do you take a board seat?
So in a board seat may or may not happen, in the sense, because typically you need a 10% to be on the board. But you can be an advisor even with 1, 2, 3%, or sometimes it's lower if someone wants you as an advisor, right? So typically what I do is, if they need me as an advisor, I would typically spend 1 to 2 hours per month. And again, we'll clarify what areas of help do they need in, whether it's fundraising, digital marketing, or culture, or sometimes just a sounding board to founders in terms of what's the best way to build teams, how do you think about exit. right? And there's no cash sort of component. My time is, we value it at a certain level, and that's sort of converted to shares, right, over time. So, and that's interesting because at least I have my skin in the game. I sort of get to have interesting conversations. I get a deeper peek into a business, and yeah, my time and effort gets converted into equity, and hopefully some of them will pay off.
How would you say Silicon Valley is different from the startup landscape you see here in Singapore and Southeast Asia in general? How similar or different is it? And how they talk about like the PayPal mafia or the Microsoft Mavericks, and how a lot of startup ecosystems are built that way, when founders start something and then exit 10, 15 years later, and then they go on to invest in the community. And that's what sort of builds that ecosystem as we know it. And in this part of the world, we are starting to hear that there is a Lazada mafia being formed. And what do you think about how Singapore and Southeast Asia startup space is different from Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem has a lot of time advantage, right? They started much earlier. Singapore, Southeast Asia has primarily been a trading hub. So a lot of business folks, and again, we've got to be very careful with what is a startup, what is not. And to me, like I said, every business, there are different kinds of businesses, different business models. I have equal amount of respect for a salon and a chicken rice stall and a barber, because guess what? Most of them have been around for 10, 20, 30 years. They make real cash. But the way today we define as startups, many of them don't make profits for a long, long time, right? So we've got to clarify that, all of these are businesses. Startups in our usual parlance is product companies, venture backed, which are looking to scale rather quickly, and there is an exit in mind. Most typical businessman, they run a family business, they run for generations, right? So the language is different. Silicon Valley is obviously primarily been around the startup world, product companies, venture back, scale quickly, looking for moonshot ideas, right? It's not just about let's do something to sort of make money, right? A lot of these innovators are thinking of solving large problems, be it from the PayPal mafia or from the Stanfords or Harvards or from the garages, right? So there's a bigger innovation at picture. So I think, the time benefit apart, the fundamental differences that I've seen, Prahlad, is a couple of things really. I think the scale or the level or the risk appetite of innovation is far different, far ahead, right? If you look at the startup ecosystem in Singapore, Southeast Asia, you can say maybe 20, 30 years old, right? But very few companies are indigenous or global in nature or completely indigenous or completely different. Everything is something from Silicon Valley.
The Uber of this, or the Airbnb
Uber of this.
Right? Yeah.
Correct, right? A carousel. It's a business model that's localized. Nothing wrong. That's how it happens. I've always been a proud believer of imitation than innovation, right? There's a whole philosophy of various cultures. That's a great way to learn, even as individuals. How can we imitate or model certain idols and then innovate, right? So maybe in Southeast Asia, my thesis is that we started the first 20, 30 years to imitate existing models, localize them. And I'm hoping in the next 10, 20, 30 years, there will be indigenous innovation coming from India, China, Southeast Asia. Yeah.
What do you think that takes? Is it a question of cultural norms here and people's risk appetite and how far ahead they're thinking as entrepreneurs? Or is it more of a fiscal issue where the level of investment and the priorities of funds are very different in this region, and they see it as purely a source of growth and not to actually change the world, as they say in Silicon Valley. So how much of it do you think is on the venture capital community, and how much on entrepreneurs in this region itself, in terms of why our time horizon in this part of the world is not as long term as Silicon Valley?
Yeah, it's a bit of all. It's a bit of experience, exposure. It's a bit of the whole. If you have always been a trading nation, I tell this to friends, is Singapore 200 years ago was a fishing village. Today, it's no different. Primarily, we are still a fishing village, except instead of fish, we sort of market fintech, right? So it's still very much a trading mold, and nothing wrong with it. It's just a nature of the land. Funding as it changes, as different global VCs start coming in, there's going to be intermingling of people and cultures. There needs to be an osmosis. That thought process needs to permeate. A lot of the typical founders you see are US returned Singaporeans, US returned Indians or Indonesians. So it'll take a few generations, right? for that cultural exposure, intermingling, osmosis, financial capital, fiscal elements to sort of come as few exits happen. Southeast Asia is just beginning to see exits. Uh, as exits happen, the mafias or the maverick group starts forming, and people's risk appetite changes. Right? I've seen this firsthand in 20 years. When I first started at IE Singapore, it was very different. You had hardly any VCs. Today, you have 200 plus VCs. You earlier had only a lot more services companies, and now every college, university has a accelerator, incubator. There's a whole cultural shift, even to accept failure. To even today, families are in fact, in my child's preschool, he's 5.5. This Friday, they have a class on entrepreneurship, right? And this tells you that the fact that these words are being used, literally entrepreneurship, it's not your American let's have a lemonade stall, right? They've been asked to think about, oh, what will you make, who will you sell to, at what price point. And it's very interesting to hear their ideas, which means he or she, at least I'll know by this Friday, but it didn't seem like, oh, come, let's make lemonade and sell. That's a trading model, nothing wrong with that. But the fact that they're talking about making and building, it's slightly different, right? So I think it'll take, maybe 15, 20 years. And in Singapore, you're beginning to see Singapore being progressive. A lot of the things are government top-down driven, right? The Temasek GICs, the government research institutes. You see the green plan. There's a whole focus on alternate food for food security, climate change, clean tech. This is R&D driven, right? So today in Singapore, I've met companies. I've met one, SunGreen, for example, from the NUS labs. Tulika Raj, she sort of built a very interesting prototype and model to sort of create clean hydrogen, right? So this is not, e-commerce. This is saying, hey, I'm going to build clean hydrogen from H2O in a very efficient manner, right? Likewise, Singapore, there are a lot of pioneering companies like, Tyndall's or the Next Gen Foods, etc., which are pioneering, or even various other companies in the alternate protein space, Shock Food, Sheet Just, right? So that model is going to be, in specifically areas where Singapore as an economy tends to benefit. I think you will start seeing. I'm already beginning to see this, and in another decade, this is going to definitely be the case. Someone probably is already working on quantum and nano. Singapore is deeply entrenched into deep tech. They have Entrepreneur First as a incubator accelerator to sort of push in that direction in partnership with SG Innovate. So I think it's happening, but things take time. Sometimes you need a generation to pass off.
You mentioned Entrepreneur First and SG Innovate. I've been for their events, and it's fantastic. Again, a place to network and connect with people who have been there, done that, right? But just a quick question on: do you think the process of building a startup, from the conception of an idea to validating that idea, to building a team, to scaling it, to fundraising, to product market fit, and as you say, product founder fit, do you think this whole process in general is being over formalized? Like there's a certain process, and to me, some of the things, like I wonder, like the Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Facebooks of the world, they didn't look at any of these textbooks on startups. Like they just built something, and it was first a product, and then they evolved into being leaders from just that product geek kind of a personality. And whereas I feel today, from the start, it's like there's a step A, B, C, which is get an idea, validate it, test it, which are all correct in terms of the iterating process. But I get this feeling that people who know nothing about startups also know that this is the textbook and this is the process. And do you see that? Do you think it is being over formalized, and is that hindering innovation in any way, or it's the right entrepreneurs are still shining? And just in the number of companies you would be meeting on a daily basis or a weekly basis, what have you been seeing in terms of how out of the box people are thinking?
Yeah, I think you've put it brilliantly. I didn't think of it that way, but now that you put it that way, I agree. I think there is a set of founders who are saying, you know what, startups are cool, people are making money, unicorns are happening. Let's take templates, let's make these decks, because, well, so many companies today are in a position to be able to raise, classic $500,000 to $1 million using a safe note on a pitch deck, right? which means you are, and again, nothing wrong. So my conclusion there is you can have all kinds of entrepreneurs in an ecosystem, right? There are a lot who start with the R&D. There are a lot who chance upon an idea and build a prototype. There are some who will say, I don't want to raise capital. Why should I dilute? I just want to build a good business, right? So I think that the beauty is the ecosystem. I think there's enough for all sorts of models. But I will at the same time also agree that there are a lot of founders who are just saying, let's ride the wave. The macroeconomic environment is, supported by VCs. If I can iterate this process, follow the YC templates, follow the EF templates, have these decks, checkbox, let's give it a shot. Let's pitch. And there's enough FOMO, there's enough liquidity in the market. Maybe there'll be people who'll back me. And guess what? Maybe 2-3 out of those companies will succeed, right? So you're starting with the pitch deck, the concept and the money. Some will fail, but some will maybe, that's a great opportunity. Because think of the flip side. I'd rather have this environment than 30-40 years ago where people have built a good product, but there are so many cases that the macroeconomic environment wasn't buoyant enough to support their growth, right? So I would rather have the situation where entrepreneurship as a notion is accepted, celebrated, encouraged, and let nature take its course. Some will succeed, some won't. But it's the spirit of the enterprise to sort of want to try to change something, to want to solve a problem, whether through a product or service, whether through venture capital or not. And you've brought a very good point. Again, Rachit and I constantly debate this because we've only run a services business. But very often I have found very unhappy founders who have gone through the process you just spoke about, but they have diluted themselves very quickly too early. And then you're like, hey, what is it that you're trying to do? Is it just this cycle of build, buy, raise, exit? Okay, fine. Again, if you ask me, I think that alone as a goal, I don't think it will sit well with me. If the reason I speak about a product founder fit is there genuine sort of passion or understanding in depth about a problem? Because again, your solutions may not work in the first go, but you'll have to find different ways. If this is just a quick rich method, may work for some, but again, for me, the idea is about the process of sort of the biggest joys are, when you have built something, when that thing works, when the client is happy, or when the client is not happy, bashes you, but you're sort of able to solve a problem. When you're able to sort of, be of help to someone, when you're able to create jobs, when you're able to sort of, there are those moments when you see, when you're able in a position to make other people millionaires and their families happy. It's again, I'm sure these are cliches spoken about, but there's massive joy. But today you're right. The two big milestones are celebrated are, funds raised and exit, which is again, great. You should. But again, they joke about it. Like when you raise funds, if you actually think about it, what's so great about it? You've raised capital. That's great. Or you've got a loan. Okay. That's, no one celebrates, I want a loan. Loan is considered to be negative. But hey.
Nice. All right.
Yeah,
nice comparison.
Like, my God. Yeah. Oh my God, he's under debt. Debt is a negative word. But he's raised it means suddenly he's killed it. I don't know why. You've just diluted your equity. May not be a great thing depending on how you have negotiated. But that's why I said, I have a lot of respect for there's so many business folks. You call them entrepreneurs, you call them founders, you call them businessmen, women. I have really a lot of respect for people who run small, medium businesses. They're creating jobs, they're creating profits. I really think they should be celebrated.
I think that's a beautiful point you brought up. And just in terms of how people typically see doing good or giving back to society in terms of just giving money away without the idea of making it back. But like you said, it is probably the most noble thing to build a scalable business, employing, in your case with Happy Marketer, about 50 plus people across the region. Who can then support their families, went on to become millionaires in the case of liquidity events. But that is a very noble thing. And that is something that, like you said, small business enterprises usually consist about half an economy. People who just run their own stall with 1 or 2 workers are actually contributing to the economy in a sustainable fashion. And so that's a beautiful point you mentioned. And I think it's a good segue also to ask you about, apart from all these, venture investments and enterprise level projects you're involved in, tell us briefly about what you do to give back as well. Like I think you're doing all of it. You're also involved in a certain level of charity. Is there Is there a certain focus area, a certain cause that you're drawn to, and how's that going? I know you do that in collaboration with your wife Dipti as well. So tell us briefly about what that's like.
Yeah, it sort of stems from our core philosophy. So both, I mean, Dipti is a doctor, so I think one of the things it's quite easy for us is to realize the value that that profession brings in terms of saving lives. So I think fundamental reality check of what we do in the corporate world, marketing world, certain professions just lend itself to a higher value, not necessarily in terms of money, but in terms of impact, right? And I think the two areas close to our sort of heart is about education and health, right? And it goes down to the philosophy of equitable access. Earlier, I spoke to about when you asked me about my childhood, is the fact that a lot of those things which we took for granted just happened, right? A home, food, access to sports, healthcare, education, etc. And if you start thinking about it, I think probably with 90% of the world, that's that can't be taken for granted. That's not an option, right? In fact, just yesterday at a friend's home, the helper, I just heart broke. The helper's home that she's a Filipino, which is sort of saved to sort of build for her parents for 10 years, just was washed away overnight because of a typhoon, right? I mean, the basic home, right? So when you think of success, money, etc., I think once you realize that so much is to do not just with you, but with the broader ecosystem, economy, access, I think that sort of forms our ethos or spirit of what we want to do. So I think charity is a good word, but I think it's about sustainable charity. It's about social enterprise. It's about that cliche of giving fish versus teaching to fish, right? So I think there are a few things that over time that has happened, primarily in the area of healthcare or education. I think the very first one that we had done was during our wedding, where obviously people love giving gifts in Indian weddings, and we love gifts too. But I think with the gift process, you realize you probably might relate to this as an Indian. At a wedding, you might get two sets of pressure cookers or mixers or quilts or whatever, right? And there's so much duplication and excess. So we had a very simple thing that we had a gift registry. Also, we had an option. So through the Milap platform, Milap, which started out of Singapore, we said, for every dollar that's gifted to us, we'll sort of match it with a dollar, right? And they went to specific causes of education, health, sanitation, etc. And that was great. Fabulous response in 2 days. I think I forget the exact number, 1 lakh, 2 lakhs, whatever. But that sort of gave us inspiration, saying, hey, wow, this works, right? So whilst we got our gifts, and we get reports, right, in today's world, wow, these 6 girls have been educated, right? The joy of that is very different. You may have a good meal, a good thing that you consumed and it's gone, right? And that, at least individually we feel we've always had enough, right? So we sort of continued that with, I think on Milap, we've done quite a few during the pandemic where, again, this whole dollar for dollar matching concept. In 2020 April, we did it for the migrant workers. 2021, we once again did it, and great response from whether people from India, NRIs, OCIs, Singaporeans, great media coverage. And so for us, I think it's not about just giving, but also can we create a movement? Can we mobilize? Can we, in a funny way, can we market what we are doing? Because a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but I come from a different school of thought. It is not about showing off. It is about, can I encourage others to join along? And when we did this, you won't believe, so many people wrote to us with just one message saying, thank you for doing this, or creating a pathway for us to donate. Thank you for creating a channel to co-create or contribute, right? So a lot of people who want to do may not know, hey, what should I do? Is this source credible? But if someone's catalyzed, so to me, the real word is really catalyzing and creating a movement so that others can be mobilized and they can come along, right? That is the sort of the other ethos, that if you do something, we want to collaborate and create a movement and mobilize so that the impact is higher. Simple, right? Because I genuinely believe, I think most people, are very good and kind at heart, and they sort of want to do, but they may not know what to do. So I think, given what I may have achieved in the corporate world, given what my wife has done in the medical world, you want to sort of bring that skill set, right? And in the future, I think what we really want to do is take, and I'll give you an example of the ripples that get created. When the second Milap campaign happened, the organization TIE, where I'm part of the board, they said, wow, 2 individuals can do this, and in a week raise $250. As an organization, we can do more. So that one spark created ripples. And in 9 days thereafter, we ran a global tie campaign, which was co-supported by Mr. Vinod Khosla from Khosla Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were doing dollar for dollar, he said, you know what, I'm going to match $1 million. If Thai, you can raise $1 million. So we did a massive Bollywood cricket virtual event through which we raised about collectively with Mr. Khosla check about 3.4 million US dollars, right? So to me, it's not about the 3.4. It's about what started as a simple Sunday evening activity led to a big event, right? That sparked that ripple. And so we hope we can over time institutionalize this to create, again, the word to me is ripples of change, and sort of mobilize this at a larger scale for equitable access, primarily focusing on education, health. In terms of markets, again, obviously India, Indonesia is close to heart. Both of us grew up there, and there's a lot of opportunity and need there. And I think we also sort of love supporting entrepreneurs or doing something in that domain. So, for example, in Singapore, there's a Bangladeshi friend who runs Fazad, who runs something called Doormat. He's trying to create a cloud kitchen model for migrant workers, right? How do you ensure good, clean food is delivered to them in a respectable, good, sustainable packaging, right? Why should they get leftovers, or why should they sort of have to, struggle for food, right? So I think you can even do this through investments, right? So I think there's, donations, charities, scalable, mobilized, charitable events, or through investments. And we hope to sort of keep that ethos going.
Quick rapid fire round. I'm just going to name a person or an idea or a concept, and you just have to say one word, just one word that comes to your mind.
Sure.
Lee Kuan Yew.
Grit.
Censorship.
Not good.
That's two. Adam Newman.
Disgraceful.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Cunning.
Climate change.
Crucial.
Shashi Tharoor.
Flamboyant.
Donald Trump.
Nuisance.
Wokeism.
Indifferent.
Modi.
Ruthless.
Ruthless. Okay. Okay. I just want to end with suggestions that you would have for the audience, people who are aspiring to grow within the marketing world or aspiring startup founders. Any top 5 books that you would recommend?
I think, the few that have sort of been very helpful to me. So Profit First, whether you're a product or if it's services, for sure. Even if you're a product, right? I think you've got to have a path to profit. I think that's one really life-changing book for us. Scaling Up, I spoke about that on Vamish. That was a very, very good one about how do you sort of move towards scalable, predictable revenue. 0 to 1, I'm sure many of you would perhaps have read that. I would also, talk about something as, the book Grit. I used that word earlier, but Angela Duckworth's Grit, I think that's an important one. Also, I've quite enjoyed reading Hard Things About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz's book. I think, these 5, I think, I think just generally come to my mind at this moment. But, I think what's important is just, again, like the networking as a process, this creating a process of not just consuming from books, podcasts, videos, but having your own point of view and conviction. I think the biggest gap I see is a lot of people don't read, or read or consume consciously. But even for the ones who do, is how do you sort of assimilate and have your unique point of view? Because remember, like I said, when you're networking or when you're connecting with people virtually or in real life, if you don't have your original point of view or thought process on something, again, it's hard to make that impression. People may not have to agree with you, but it's just about, this is what you stand for. So I think those books, but generally the process of consuming through books, videos, and creating your own thought process and point of view.
So you mentioned videos. Any YouTube channels or podcasts that you follow?
Yeah, I think I do sort of follow a few. Off late, what I've really enjoyed, although these were like sort of series. So Harsha Bhogle, a cricket commentator, he has one beautiful one on Mission ISRO. So anyone interested in, of course, this is about the Indian Space Research Organization, but I think just a story of the of Homi Baba and the entire team and Vikram Sarabhai, the whole process of how India sort of pioneered the space movement. I thought Harsha did a great job. It's a long series, but I think a good one. I think apart from that, I'm a big, I love the podcasts and newsletters from Scott Galloway. So Kara
Section 4.
Yeah, Section 4 or even Pivot. I think it's a great one. Just incisive point of view, cutting edge information, just a point of view. I just love it that how he doesn't mince. And
Do you watch All In?
Yes, All In's a great one as well. Then also Dave Perel. I'm a big consumer of his weekly newsletter and podcast. I think he gets some great stuff, especially for content creators. James Clear, I love his 321 newsletter and the podcast that comes along with it. People from the marketing agency world, you may want to follow Rishabh Tobaccowala, his Sunday night newsletters. Yeah, Publicis. Great newsletter, and I think he has some shows as well. Also in the VC world, I think my first million, that's been a good one. Or even Tim Ferriss, I think his books, resources, and many of his episodes are brilliant. Also, the knowledge project has been absolutely brilliant. Some of the recent podcasts and Sunday newsletters have been brilliant. So yeah, in my system, these 5 or 6 that I mentioned, they would be part of my weekly consumption in some format. And again, it's not about, it's like I said, right? You need to have a broader perspective on life. It just can't be about the business you're operating. I'm sure in marketing there are many more. But to me, I would sort of encourage folks to just expand their horizon, because there's a lot more to the world beyond just marketing and marketing agencies. And I think if you do that, it'll help your marketing career.
Prantik, I think we've come to the end. We can see the sun set down and it's getting dark for both of us. Thank you so much for taking the time. I could go on with you for days on end, and we should do this again, going deeper on some of the things you mentioned. But I think the viewers would have got a good overview of all the aspects of your experience from university, and then the jobs that you had, to going all in with Rachit and Happy Marketer's journey, to then being acquired within Dentsu Group now, and all the investments you're making, your point of view on startups, Southeast Asia, what you look for when you invest, and also all your charitable investments, and just your thought process, how you process things, and the content you consume to keep your mind on its toes. So I think it's been great. It's been great for myself, learning all these different aspects, and I want to do this again with you sometime. Thank you so much, Prantik.
Oh, thanks, Prahlad. I'm very happy that our chance encounter in the washroom led to this.
Yeah.
Again, one never knows where a simple washroom networking could lead to what. But also, I must say thank you for doing this. I think it's not easy to sort of. I love the way you prepare. I love the fact that you have sort of read or it was amazing that you seem to know a lot about different aspects that you wanted to ask me. You've done so much homework and research. Not easy. So kudos to you for sort of doing this, and not easy hosting something for over 2 hours. Would love to do this again sometime.
You were doing the talking. You were doing the talking. I'm more than happy.
No, but it's no, but again, thank you once again, and wish you all the best. Hope you get all those big names on your podcast, and just hopefully you get to chase whatever dreams that you dream of.
Appreciate that. See you at office next week.
See you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Prantik.
Thanks, Prahlad. Bye.